Hello again. Welcome to Your Politics, our political podcast coming to you from RTÉ's Leinster House studio. I'm Aine Lawlor this wet and snowy Thursday afternoon. With me in our cosy little cubbyhole is Sandra Hurley, Paul Cunningham, and coming in to join us, David Murphy. It's certainly cold outside, but it's been stormy inside and here, hasn't it, Sandra? And the whole question is, of course, that decision on the eviction ban. I suppose you could say from the government's point of view, the can wasn't kicked down the road this time.
Mm-hmm. Yes, they certainly took a decision. They've had to row behind it and insist it is the right decision. A difficult one, according to the Taoiseach Leo Varadkar. And he has also said they know it's going to be difficult to defend. But they are insisting that if they had extended the eviction ban, it would have made things worse in the medium to long term by pushing more landlords out of the market. Now, the opposition all united saying it was absolutely the wrong call, that there's going to be a massive increase in homelessness, a tsunami of homelessness, according to the Social Democrats. So the government, I think, has really been on the defensive over the past couple of days. And today in particular, I was struck that you had the Taoiseach in one part of Leinster House, also the Taoiseach and the Housing Minister, all trying to hold the line here. And they are holding the line for now. They're saying they're not going to reverse the decision, but they are under sustained pressure from the opposition, and I don't think that's going to let up, even though the Dáil is going to go into recess, because we know when it comes back we're going to have this Dáil vote, and then also the date for the expiry of the eviction ban is going to be looming closer, which means the homelessness numbers are going to be watched very closely.
And the question was asked by Green TD Nasa Harrigan, because she said in her constituency all the hotels, all the bed and breakfast, she said they're full. She said, when this ban ends, where will those who are evicted, where will they go?
And that's a question which is being raised by journalists. Morning Ireland, that question was being put to ministers, probably by yourself. It was being put by Pearse Doherty to Micheál Martin today. And he had a particular case, which was a local authority letter, which said that there wasn't, to a parent with two kids, to say that there wasn't any hotels, there wasn't any emergency accommodation. The best thing you could do was for a safe place to stay was to present yourself to your local Garda station. So that seems to be the option which is being presented to people right now, and that's before the ban itself has actually faded away. The government response to this is that keeping the ban would only make the situation worse. So even though we're in a terrible situation, which people are facing crises just like that, if you retain the ban, it's only going to get worse. More landlords are going to leave the market. Fewer rental places are going to be available. Rents are going to go up, and the situation is even worse. I think what the crux of it, though, the bit that I don't quite get, is that the government knew when it introduced the ban towards the end of October that it could end come March. So one would imagine that it would have been some contingency plan, which was, or scenario play, if we end the ban, what are we going to do? What measures are we going to have ready to go to be able to ameliorate the crisis? Because this issue of increasing homelessness would be a consequence of it. And what we had announced on Tuesday was a number of measures, but they're longer term. And so this is, to a certain extent, it strikes me as a crisis of their own making.
And just on those mitigation measures, David, because, in terms of tax breaks or whatever for landlords, we're told Michael McGrath will be looking at all of this in terms of the budget. So that's the autumn. And in terms of, people who are renting and having the option to buy, or local authorities or housing bodies stepping in, there may need new legislation, and we don't have a budget line identified yet. So what does that say about the level of preparation into this decision?
Well, there's a few things. I think in the first instance, it's interesting making the comparison between this decision and the decisions around the cost of living measures. We knew the cost of living measures were all going to expire at the end of February. Government was well aware of it. It said there's going to be no cliff edge in relation to this. What they did was we knew that there was the lower rates of tax on petrol and diesel. They were going to expire, and the government basically tapered them out, so there wasn't going to be that cliff edge. They also extended the VAT cut for the hospitality industry, so they were well prepared, and as soon as they made the announcement, the changes were made to take effect. With this, something seems to have happened whereby the indications coming from government buildings during Monday was that this ban could be extended, but perhaps the exemptions would be expanded. Then on the night when it came to the meeting of the three coalition party leaders, Eamon Ryan, Micheál Martin, Leo Varadkar, and the Minister for Housing, Darragh O'Brien, something changed. And perhaps it was the influence of the legal advice, which effectively said, if you are going to extend this ban, you need to have evidence that it is going to improve things. And we know that the numbers of people who are homeless were going up. And we also know that the number of landlords exiting the market is increasing. So by extending the ban, there was the concern that more landlords would exit the market. There would be a reduction in terms of accommodation. And then, as Paul mentioned there, things could get worse and rents could go up. So there seems to have been a change. And then the government were in a situation whereby they had to come up with something to soften the blow. But all of the bricks and mortar weren't in place to be able to say, this is happening right now. This big measure is going to happen right now to address this. Instead, we had a number of smaller measures, smaller schemes, which are going to be incrementally increased, but not the kind of big step that would make you think, actually, that's going to help a lot of people immediately.
So there's going to be a vote. When is it? The 22nd?
So it looks as if
21st, I think.
No, Sinn Féin have confirmed that the private members' bill will be brought to the Dáil on Tuesday the 21st, but the vote will be part of the block vote. So that means it'll be happening on Wednesday evening. So there is going to be a vote on this. And we can see from the Dáil debate so far that, Sinn Féin, Labour, Soc Dems, an awful lot of independents are going to be voting against. But the focus of attention inevitably will come back to those two Green TDs who did voice concern about that. That's Nessa Harrigan and also Patrick Costello. But the indications that I'm hearing is that they're not going to vote. They did vote against the government in the context of the moving of the National Maternity Hospital. But my guess is that this time they won't.
So it looks as if the government may survive this, but in terms of a vote, but how much, I was wondering about this today, how much of a defining moment do you think this decision on the eviction
I think
ban?
it's a really big decision, because we are going to have statistics, numbers, and they're going to be real people, faces attached to those numbers. That's all going to pan out over the next couple of months. The first statistics that reflect the lifting of the ban won't be available until the end of May. But if those monthly figures and the monthly figures after that all illustrate a massive increase in homelessness, that is going to be hugely damaging for the government. And we have had the spectre raised again of people being told that they're going to have to present to Garda stations because the emergency accommodation is full. And we know that that was really damaging in the past, seeing families who had to sleep in Garda stations. That is something nobody wants to see.
Just one additional thing is I think we now know that you're going to have that Sinn Féin debate and vote. The following week, as I understand it, there's also going to be time allocated by government for statements on the ban. So we're going to have 2 weeks of this. And I think within that, you're going to see a deepening of this argument between Sinn Féin and indeed Social Democrats using very highly emotive language, that this was a calculated decision by the government to force people into homelessness, that it is a cruel decision, that type of language. And the government trying to fight back by saying this is a false narrative, that it is we're siding with the landlords against ordinary people. And you saw that fight back coming from Leo Varadkar yesterday, from Micheál Martin today. And so I think that the white hot issue that we have is going to flow through the rest of the month.
But the one thing, I mean, government and opposition, everybody agrees on this, comes back to supply. And then we had Leo Varadkar, the Taoiseach, telling the Fine Gael Parliamentary Party that there's a deficit of 250,000 homes in this country. Now, even if the government way exceeds its targets for this year, it's a long time before you actually break that deficit, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it was interesting, the Taoiseach's interview last night on the 6-1 News, because he did actually make some broader points that in a way fill in some of the gaps. Like, the builders went bust, the banks that lent to the builders went bust, the country went bust, and all of that at a time when the population was beginning to increase. And then we had the economy coming back, and we had more people coming to live in Ireland and more people returning to Ireland who were living abroad. All of those things while the house building was stalled. But I think, having said that, with this decision, I think a lot of people are beginning to think now, was it actually the right decision to introduce the evictions ban in the first place? The interesting figure coming out during the week was the number of evictions which were stalled. There were 2,700 evictions paused when they introduced the evictions ban. The other interesting aspect is how many have been stalled because of the evictions ban. The government haven't yet given a figure on that, so we don't know how much that is. But if, for example, there are 2 people in each property, I don't know what it is, but if, let's say, for example,
I think there's been 1,400 queries to Threshold from people worried about eviction during the time of the ban who've had notice. So that's a ballpark.
So that's a ballpark, but we could potentially be talking about thousands of people receiving evictions notices, and we don't know how many there are. And I think the next few weeks and months are going to be really telling. But there is a rule kind of in economics that, you don't interfere in private markets unless you really know what the effect of that measure is going to be. I'm not so sure that the government realised what the full effect of this was going to be.
But I think something that doesn't work for Fine Gael and for the Taoiseach, as David was mentioning there, is to argue this old argument that they inherited a broken economy. And one of the prominent Fine Gael minister told me that one of the big mistakes they made in the 2020 general election is to once again make the point that in 2011 they inherited a broken economy. That argument is done and dusted because we are now over a decade past that, and I don't think it cuts any mustard with the electorate. Fine Gael have been in power for a long time. The accusation from the opposition would be that they have had a long time to fix the housing crisis and to get the wheels in motion again.
And against this backdrop, it turns out there may be a delay in coming up with a wording on the proposed housing referendum. But we are going to be getting a referendum in the autumn, in the late autumn, early winter, on the position of women in the home.
Yes, finally. And if you cast your minds back to 2018, I was looking this up again today. Charlie Flanagan, the previous Justice Minister, announced a date. I think it was the 26th of October 2018. We were going to have this referendum. It got shelved because they felt they didn't have enough time. So this time they're hoping that they have a long enough run into it, because we know that while it might be obvious and has been called for a long time to delete what Ivana Bacik, the Labour leader, called sexist language from the Constitution. What do you replace it with? We know that this can be very contentious, and we've seen this in the past. Even the children's referendum ran into big problems over how the government explained the arguments. The Supreme Court ruled against the government on that time. So Leo Varadkar, the Taoiseach, when he was announcing this yesterday, said they are aware of the pitfalls. They want to take their time. They want to get this right. It's also going to be a test for the Electoral Commission. It's going to be involved in its first big open vote. It's replacing the Referendum Commission. So there's a lot at stake here to make sure that they do get the result over the line.
Yeah, I mean, another consideration will be whether they hold one referendum, which, given that they're changing Article 40.1 and then 41.1.2.3.4, are you going to get one question, or are you going to get 3 or 4 questions to vote on? That's just relating to gender equality, so complicated enough. And then do you throw in a second referendum? We've heard from the Taoiseach Leo Varadkar that
my head is hurting already.
Ireland, wait, you get this. Ireland's participation in the EU's Patents Court. I
That's
look
going
forward
to
to
be a
the
thriller,
debate
I think,
which
isn't it, Paul?
you chair on that one.
In fairness, that's a
separate-
technical one, and that
separate
has to go
podcast,
through.
that one.
Yeah. We'll park that one. But I'll tell you where my head is hurting. Yeah, go on.
Just to finish the point, which is that it is a consideration for government, because if you put in 2 or 3 referendums together, then one gets more coverage than the other. And that can either be a good or bad thing, depending if gender equality is the issue you're most focused on.
It's just whenever you start putting something into the Constitution, history suggests it's not that simple. And words, what is a family? What is care? What does that mean in English? What does that mean in Irish? And these things can, I mean, it's the rule with all referendums, isn't it? They're never about what they're actually about. But these things can certainly grow.
And some experts would
legs.
factor in that 25% of the electorate is going to vote no anyway.
I think we got an indication also from the Taoiseach today. He was in front of the Oireachtas Finance Committee and he was asked about the referendum again, and he suggested it might be limited to 2 amendments. One would be some general point about gender equality. The second one would be something around the scope of care. No mention of family, as you suggested there. That could be difficult to define. The danger, of course, with defining care is that it might create an entitlement in some way, that the state would have to step in and ensure that care is provided. That might have a monetary cost. That is something yes, exactly.
And that's something that's been resisted, hasn't it?
Yes.
Quite very different iterations by the state over the years. Yeah,
exactly. And I think that they are really aware of that. So I think I would expect something more general. But we have seen in the past that even when lawyers pore over this for a long time in advance to come up with the perfect wording, it doesn't always fly.
All right. Paul, take me back to Chile in 1973, and why is it
Yes.
relevant in terms of Irish politics?
For those joining us on the cameras here will be able to see, this is, just get it lined up there, yep. This is a case for left government getting rid of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, and this was produced by People Before Profit. It's a 29-page A5 document, and goes through an awful lot of the stuff we would have heard before, the reason for it, and in particular the view from PBP that parties on the left all too often end up acting as a sort of mudguard to Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, and their agenda is lost. So it's saying the only way you can get a true left government is to get rid of them altogether. But I suppose the bit that sort of caught everyone's eye, what page is it now? Got my glasses on here, which is a terrible sign of old age. Yeah, on page 20, it begins to deal with, the issues that there may be, let's call it conspiracy theories, could be
well,
out
if you
there.
did have a left-wing government elected, isn't that the scenario?
Exactly. Here we go.
About,
That the evil people like Sandra here, they will use their control over the media to turn a population against a left-wing government. Even the prospect of a Sinn Féin-led government has led to a barrage of propaganda from Irish Independent, Irish Times and RTÉ against the party.
Yeah.
So that's the accusation. And it does go back to mention Chile in 1973, but also it mentions...
What happened in Chile in I'm not old enough
So
to
this was-
remember all of this.
Well, I
Come
was
on.
5 in 1973, but this was the idea that there was going to be a left-wing government under Allende, and it was just basically taken out by the military. Hence the connection with maybe the military, the guards, and their power over the media would be able to do that again. But maybe a more salient point was that they look at what happened in the UK and they say what happened to Jeremy Corbyn, and people were no longer listening to the argument. He was just branded communist, and on that basis he never got the chance to influence his party. But to a certain extent there was I was asking a few people from PBP, and it didn't seem to me that they all knew the 29 pages, including that particular thing as well. They defended it afterwards. I'm not sure how much they were
Had
aware of it
proofread
beforehand.
maybe, yeah. And Leo Varadkar was looking at this as well, wasn't he? He
He's
was
having
talking
great
to
fun.
Richard Boyd Barrett about it on the Dáil today.
He was slightly patronising, and he's saying that he liked them, these PBP people, and
Does
they
he?
thought, and they thought they were passionate and sometimes intelligent, even though they disagreed on most
He
of
must
things.
be wooing them for a future coalition.
Well, then he, not quite, because he finished off by saying, "But you're all a bit bonkers, aren't you?" So,
Who's going where, by the way? Because we're going into recess now,
That's
the Dáil
right.
for a week.
So
Yeah.
sorry, could
it
I,
is-
sorry, just
Yeah.
I should have said it. Breed Smith was smiling and laughing with Richard Boyd Barrett while he was going through the motions, and then she came back with this nice little acid retort that she would rather be bonkers than be a Tory boy like Leo Varadkar. So,
There you
well,
go.
cut both ways.
That was the comedy in the Dáil today. So who's going where, David? Because
So
they're all
next
heading off for
week,
St. Patrick's
they're
Day.
heading off for St. Patrick's Day. Taoiseach Leo Varadkar is in Washington. Tánaiste Micheál Martin, he's going to New York and Boston. There may be some interesting events in relation to the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement in New York. So that will be one to watch. Eamon Ryan is going to Singapore, China, Hong Kong, and they are long-haul flights. Just
There's
worth
a lot
mentioning.
of carbon. That's what you're insinuating there.
There's a lot of carbon.
All our son the Heron.
Yeah.
Michael McGrath, Finance Minister, he is going to Chicago and Toronto in Canada. Pascal Donoghue, Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform, he's going to Frankfurt, Cologne and Berlin.
His friends in Frankfurt.
Frankfurt, of course, home of the ECB. The people who are bringing our interest rates higher and higher to try and deal with the inflation situation. It's worth bearing in mind, central banks, their main job is to stop inflation from getting out of control anywhere. Anyway, he'll be there in Germany. Simon Coveney, Minister for Enterprise, he is going all the way down to Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, Canberra and Perth. Norma Foley, Minister for Education, she's off to Philadelphia. Catherine Martin, Minister for the Arts, she's got a great gig. She's going to LA for the Oscars. So that will be interesting.
She's holding her own party.
And San
we're
Diego.
told.
And San Diego.
Yeah, scoot down the coast.
Yeah, it's going to be great. Did you see the red carpets change colour? It's a kind of a champagne colour this time round in LA. They've changed the red carpet.
I'm devastated.
Yeah,
David.
it's a big deal.
Devastated.
It's a big deal. There's a big story on the RTÉ website. So you can check it out there. And Darragh O'Brien, and the person who's been in the headlamps this week, he is going to Atlanta and Savannah. Heather Humphreys, Minister for Social Protection, she's off to London. And Charlie McConalogue, he's got a long haul. The tallest person in the cabinet is got the longest haul of all. He's going to Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch in New Zealand. Roderick O'Gorman, Minister for Integration, he's going to India. And Stephen Donnelly is going to Canada. Simon Harris is going to San Francisco. Hildegard Naughton is off to Miami.
Dara is due to go to Atlanta, and Savannah, which I believe is the largest St.
Dara
Patrick's
O'Brien.
Day. Dara O'Brien,
Yeah.
has the largest St. Patrick's Day parade in the United States. It's absolutely massive. But the Labour leader, Ivana Bacik, was suggesting that maybe he should stay at home and try and work on measures in advance of the ban being lifted.
Would that work? Would it deliver any more houses?
Well, who knows? If we're talking about emergency measures, maybe you could. But I do think that there's a certain amount of padwackery about the St. Patrick's Day parades. I remember being one time with Eamon Ryan, I think it was in 2009 in San Francisco, to see the entire city brought to a halt and realise that's happening right across the United States. The political power it has
And
is
the
substantial.
value, and of course, you know, Micheál Martin, of course, famously never got the chance to meet Joe Biden as Taoiseach.
Yes.
Leo Varadkar will be doing the same again, and there's a huge amount of speculation and prognostication about Joe Biden coming to Ireland.
I have a feeling that if Joe Biden comes, it's not going to be a hit and run type of visit. I think that he may spend proper time here. You know, there's a lot of speculation about whether or not he might spend a little private time here as well. And it could be a longer type of visit as opposed to a shorter one.
But is
That's the word.
Is he definitely coming?
Well, we don't know. There's talk about people scoping out places. I do remember when Barack Obama came, we all knew that the Obamas would be visiting Dalkey because there were 8 Secret Service agents in Finnegan's drinking sparkling water up at the bar in
But
plain
here's the
clothes.
thing.
And
Here's
they
the
kind of gave themselves away with the sparkling water.
Yeah, here's the thing. Will he get himself, Joe Biden, if he does come to Ireland and does spend some time here, is he going to get himself his own motorway plaza? Because that is, honest to God, one of the best monuments to a presidential visit I have ever seen built anywhere in the whole wide world. That's, of course, a personal opinion. All right, on that, we're going to leave it. Thank you all for listening to us. And if you enjoyed Your Politics, please subscribe and follow. Go dtí an Dír Dín Seo Chugainn, an Bhuir an Galéir, Slán go fóill.